The last 7 years of Scorn's life had led to this night. 7 long, brutal years had turned him into the great beast he was now. No longer was he a mere night brother, condemned to a life of savagery on Dathomir. He would soon be an Imperial Inquisitor, an elite Jedi killer. He only needed to pass his final test. This night would forge his destiny and secure his safety. He gripped the lightsaber in his hand. He had used the weaker training sabers more times than he could count, but now the Grand Inquisitor had bestowed upon him a superior weapon. This weapon marked his transition from a mere acolyte to a true servant of the Emperor. This weapon would seal his fate. Scorn continued to walk through the streets of Baton, shrouded by the darkness of night, and concealed by the cloak that hid his face in Imperial armor. He walked until he reached the city's edge and ventured into the forests outside. He could hear the sounds of an approaching storm over the sounds of the forest around him. He focused his mind on the pain inflicted upon him throughout the past 7 years, and how it fueled his anger. That, in turn, would strengthen his connection to the dark side. Scorn's strength came primarily through his physicality, rather than through the Force. Standing nearly 2 meters tall, the Zabrak was a behemoth whom few could parallel in terms of raw strength. However, his aptitude for the Force was rather lacking. He certainly had a degree of strength in it, though it had never been nourished in his training. This was due to the inherent flaw of the Inquisitorius. Inquisitors were meant to be able to hunt and kill Jedi, but couldn't be given the chance to become strong enough to overthrow their masters, even if they united. And so their training was limited, especially in regards to the Force. They studied the strengths and weaknesses of every known form of lightsaber combat, were given versatile lightsabers that easily allowed them to switch styles in an instant, and could even command Imperial forces if a mission allowed it. Though all of that paled in comparison to the power of the Force. Despite this, Scorn could still sense his quarry. He was strong in the Force, and Scorn could feel it. The light radiated from deep in these woods, and though it attempted to conceal itself, even a flicker of light stood out in a galaxy of darkness, and now Scorn would snuff it out. At last, Scorn found it, a meager wooden shack where the hermit now lived. Scorn shed his cloak upon seeing the cabin, revealing his armor and allowing for slightly more flexibility. He would need every advantage he could get, for this would be the day he seized his destiny. He began to approach the shack cautiously. As he approached, the door slowly began to open. An old human man stepped outside, looking directly at Scorn. He wore a brown cloak over a blue tunic. His gray hair was beginning to recede and thin. He emitted a strong aura of light that Scorn could sense through the Force. This was the Jedi he sought, the Jedi he would destroy. "So, you've come at last," the man said. A smile began to form on his face. Scorn was taken aback. What was this old fool smiling about? Was he stronger? Could he sense that he could easily defeat Scorn? Or was he merely too stupid to understand the grave danger he was in? "I have seen you many times in my dreams over the past few months. It would seem you have finally found me." Scorn did not move as the man took 2 slow steps forward. He gripped the lightsaber tighter in his palm. "Don't be so eager to face your demise," Scorn replied. He activated one of the blades on his lightsaber and pointed it to the old man in a challenging gesture. The deep red blade illuminated the dark woods that surrounded them. Scorn could feel the kyber crystal within emanating the hatred and rage that had been poured into it in order to corrupt it. It was a literal weapon of the dark side that he wielded in the palm of his hand. The old man's smile faded into a more neutral expression. Scorn frowned. He expected more fear from the old man, but he was still so calm. If the time has come for me to become one with the Force, then that is its will, and I submit myself to it. However, I don't believe that day is today. We'll see about that. Scorn charged. He raised the blade above his head, sprinting toward the Jedi. He swung the blade downward, but his target was no longer there. The old man nimbly ducked to the side and moved back to where Scorn had been standing. Scorn turned back around to face him. The old man still had his hands at his side. Was this fool standing his ground unarmed? Or worse, was this Jedi mocking him? Was he so arrogant to believe that he could beat Scorn without a weapon of his own? What if he wasn't arrogant? What if this Jedi was that powerful? If that were the case, Scorn would die here. If he did die here, at least that was better than dying at the hand of Darth Vader if he failed. Scorn scowled as the fear crept into his mind before it twisted into rage, fueled even further by the dark energy within his weapon. Scorn activated the second blade on his lightsaber. He leapt forward and began a sequence of quick, alternating slashes with both of his blades. The old man moved backwards as he dodged these strikes. He was deceptively quick. Suddenly, he ran forward and jumped over Scorn's head. Scorn tried to strike at the old man, but was so surprised by the maneuver he could not swing his blade in time. As he landed back onto the ground, the old man extended his hand and pushed Scorn back using the Force. His heels dug into the dirt beneath him as he struggled to hold his ground. Scorn glared up at the old man, still so calm. And he knew that Scorn was afraid. Scorn activated his lightsaber's spinning blades. The blades began to rotate around the hilt, and he allowed them to graze the dirt beneath him. The man did not react at all. No surprise, no confusion, no fear, all of which Scorn felt. Scorn released his rage, barreling forward with his spinning blades at his side. The old man simply waved his left hand, and something moved out of the corner of Scorn's eye. From within the shack, something came flying through one of the open windows. By the time Scorn realized it was a lightsaber, it was too late. It did not fly into the grasp of the old man immediately. Instead, its vibrant blue blade activated as it flew, and with perfect precision struck the hilt of Scorn's lightsaber without making contact with his hand. The weapon fell apart within his grasp as the red blades fizzled out. The old man's lightsaber returned to him as Scorn came to a halt a few meters away from him. Scorn fell on his knees. There was no hope for him now. His foe clearly outmatched him in the Force, and without a lightsaber he could not hope to defeat him. Destiny had forsaken Scorn, and he prepared for his life to come to an inglorious end. "Go on," he said. "Finish it." The old man looked down on him and began to approach. As Scorn closed his eyes and accepted his end, he heard the man's lightsaber deactivate. What was he doing? Scorn wondered if his opponent was planning to capture him. As he opened his eyes to see what the man was doing, Scorn saw him kneeling on the ground a meter away. The man had his eyes closed and seemed to be focusing on something very intently. His left hand was outstretched, the palm facing Scorn. He had a sorrowful expression now, which bewildered Scorn. He had achieved victory with ease, and yet now showed more emotion than he had during their fight. What was he getting at? Finally, after a minute, the man spoke. "I'm so sorry for what they've done to you," he said. There was an underlying emotion that Scorn could hear in his voice, and one he almost couldn't recognize. Was it pity? "You've been through so much pain, so much suffering, more than anyone should ever endure. You know nothing of what I've endured. No, but I can feel your pain. Then be the one to end it, Scorn said. This was now utter humiliation. His enemy had bested him so easily, and was now delaying the inevitable end, prolonging Scorn's shame. He had failed, and now there was nothing left. Why must this be the end? The old man asked. I have no desire to take your life. He stood and began to walk back toward his hut. Scorn watched his steady, nonchalant movements. His calm demeanor was infuriating. He opened the door and held it. Please, come inside. It'll start raining soon. We should continue this conversation indoors. Scorn continued to be bewildered by this Jedi. Scorn was trying to kill him a few moments ago, and now this Jedi was inviting him into his home? It made no sense. He was sure he wasn't being lured into some sort of trap in this hut. If the Jedi intended to kill or capture him, he would do it here and now. He could hear thunder in the distance. The storm was coming. He didn't know what the old man wanted, but Scorn cautiously stood up and walked toward the door. He eyed the lightsaber clipped to the Jedi's belt. Maybe there was still a chance. If he was lucky, the old man would let his guard down, and perhaps Scorn could get the jump on him and strike him down. If he was very lucky, the Grand Inquisitor may not ever find out he was initially defeated. Scorn walked past the Jedi and entered his shack. It was very simple on the inside. The furniture was minimal and simplistic. There was a fire going in the kitchen, boiling a pot. There were various potted plants next to the windows. It was very small, and Scorn still wasn't sure if that would benefit him or the Jedi if he attacked in here. The old man shut the door and entered the kitchen. Scorn stayed standing in front of the door. I have some broth cooking if you're hungry. I'd imagine you might be after a fight. He smiled. There was an odd warmth Scorn felt as he smiled. And here, it felt like the darkness within him was slipping away. The fear, the anger, the hate, the urge to fight and destroy, it was all fading. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. I'm fine, Scorn said. He watched as the Jedi sat at the table in the kitchen. He gestured toward the other empty seat. Scorn slowly walked over and sat in the seat across from him. My name is Jedi Master, the Jedi said. May I ask what your name is? What does it matter? Was Scorn's initial thought, and yet he felt compelled to answer. Scorn. Jedi Master frowned. Is that what you prefer to be called? It seems demeaning. It's the name the Empire gave me when I began my training. What was your name before that? What were you called on Dathomir? Scorn's eyes widened and he froze. How much did this old man know about him? How did you know I'm from Dathomir? Scorn said, his voice low and hushed. Ide's expression remained calm. I felt it. It was buried deep within you. The Empire tried to suppress everything about you, and fill you to the brim with pain and anger so they could use you as a tool. But they couldn't erase you. They could never erase your past, or the light within you. Scorn tried to slow his quickened breathing. I don't remember much about Dathomir, he confessed. I know I was a Night Brother for nearly a decade, but I can't remember any of it. My oldest memory is being tortured at Fortress Inquisitorius. They took everything from me, my past, my name, everything I was before they took me. I'm so sorry, Ide said. When I reached out, I could only feel a small fragment of your experiences. I cannot imagine the magnitude of what you've gone through. Your pity doesn't change what I've gone through. Scorn suppressed the pain within him to make way for the flood of anger. It doesn't change what I've become. Ide reached over the small table to place his hand on Scorn's shoulder, but Scorn knocked it aside. If you do not like what you've become, you could always become someone else. Like what, a Jedi? Scorn scoffed. I could never be like you. My nature is the dark side. It's in my blood. Rage and darkness have consumed my life from Dathomir to the Empire. Ide smiled again, and the anger receded again as his light touched him through the Force. You never had a choice before. You did what you had to in order to survive. You don't want to be one of them. And I was too weak to resist, Scorn said sorrowfully. For the first time in a long, long time, Scorn allowed himself to feel sorrow without allowing it to fester into aggression. He simply let himself feel. No, Ide said. You were strong for surviving, and now you have a chance. This is the day you seize your destiny. You can choose to be better. I have felt the light within you. It has always been there. Embrace it. Scorn noticed now that he was trembling. He took several deep breaths before looking back up at Ide Kier. They will find me. Even if I do, they will hunt me down and destroy me and you. The Empire will not stop until we are dead. Perhaps one day they will, or perhaps the Empire will collapse before then. My trust, however, is in the Force. I will follow the path it has laid out in front of me. He smiled again. I have no doubt that our meeting tonight was not mere chance. The Force has brought us together for a reason. There is purpose for us. Though I cannot say what exactly that purpose is, I believe we must walk this path together. Fear is their weapon to keep us from the path of light, and I refuse to fear them. Will you walk this path with me? Scorn laughed dryly. You really think I could be a Jedi? Perhaps. But I'm only asking that you embrace the light and strive to be better, not to be a Jedi. The Force matters far more than the doctrines of old. Will you walk this path with me? Ide stood and walked over to Scorn. He stopped in front of his chair and extended his hand. Scorn looked at him for a long moment. He took a deep breath. He let himself feel the warmth of this place. The welcoming light that enveloped him was a far cry from the darkness that had held him down for as long as he could remember. He could finally breathe away from the suffocating shadows of the Empire. After a moment of reflection, he stood. He shed his Inquisitor armor and let it clatter to the floor. He reached out and shook Ide's hand. I will. Ide leaned forward and embraced him, his arms wrapped around Scorn firmly. Scorn had never been hugged before. He gently placed his hand against Ide's back, attempting to mirror the gesture. His hands barely touched Ide. He had tried to kill him a few minutes ago, and here they were, dedicating themselves to the light and embracing. Ide finally pulled back after a moment. I think you need a new name. He walked over to stir the broth, still cooking over the fire. I had an old friend, back when I was a Jedi, named Eno Cordova. He told me about an ancient species of Force wielders. I don't recall the name. When he studied their language, they had a term for the light. It was Selene. They also had a term for those who returned to the light that translated to a light reborn. That term was Diaru Selene. What do you think? Would you like to be called Diaru Selene? Scorn considered it for just a moment. I think that will work. He took one more deep breath. There was still fear, but the call to the light was stronger. Maybe Ide was a fool, and maybe he was a fool for following him. But there was something to him. What Ide had said to him made him feel, for the first time, as though he could be something else. That he could ascend from the darkness that had swallowed him. That he could be something more than an agent of evil. Maybe he was a fool for thinking it, but the chance was worth taking. He would answer the light's call. Scorn let out his last breath, and Diaru breathed his first.